Hello everyone, and welcome to my Beyond the Gates official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Anita sat alone in the sterile hospital room as the rhythmic beep of the monitor echoed like a countdown she couldn't escape, her fingers trembling as she clutched the edge of the thin white blanket while sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her like memories she wasn't ready to face. And when Dr. Hargreave finally entered, his expression told her everything before his lips even moved. Because years of being a mother, a wife, and a survivor had taught Anita how to read the quiet moments, how to sense when life was about to fracture beyond repair, and when he spoke the words for months, it felt as though the air had been ripped from her lungs, because 4 months was not time. It was a sentence. It was birthdays she wouldn't see, holidays she wouldn't host, arguments she'd never resolve, love she'd never finish giving, and as tears streamed silently down her face, she thought not of herself, but of Vernon, of the way he still looked at her like she was the first miracle he'd ever known, of the way he kissed her forehead every morning without fail, unaware that the woman he loved was already slipping away. When she returned home that night, she said nothing, smiling through dinner, laughing at Vernon's jokes, watching him talk about future plans with a hope that now felt cruel, and later, alone in their bedroom, she collapsed to the floor and sobbed into her hands. Because the cruelest part of dying wasn't the fear, it was the secrecy, the weight of knowing something that would destroy everyone she loved once it was spoken aloud. Days passed before Anita finally told Vernon, choosing a quiet morning when the house was still, and when the words left her mouth, Vernon's world shattered in real time, his denial turning to anger, his anger turning to desperation as he demanded second opinions, miracles, prayers, anything that could undo what fate had already decided. But Anita, calm in a way that terrified him, simply held his hands and told him she didn't want her remaining months wasted on false hope. She wanted honesty, love, and peace, a request that felt impossible for a man who had built his entire life around protecting her. News spread quickly through Fairmont Crest, and with it came reactions that revealed more than condolences ever could. Nicole broke down, consumed by guilt over years of unresolved tension. Sharon tried to be strong but failed spectacularly, locking herself in the bathroom to scream at God for his cruelty, while Bill, haunted by his own sins, saw Anita's diagnosis as cosmic punishment for secrets he'd buried too long, and Haley, watching it all unfold from the shadows, felt something dangerously close to satisfaction, because Anita had always been the one woman who saw through her lies. As Anita's health began to visibly decline, so did the carefully maintained facades around her, because impending death has a way of stripping people bare, forcing truths into the light. And in one devastating family gathering, Anita finally demanded honesty from everyone in the room, revealing that she knew about betrayals, affairs, stolen money, and lies that had poisoned the family for years, admitting that she had stayed silent not out of weakness, but out of love, a revelation that left the room stunned and exposed. Vernon struggled the most, oscillating between fierce devotion and quiet collapse, terrified of a future without her, and in one heartbreaking moment, he confessed that he didn't know who he was before her, didn't know who he would be after, and Anita, fighting back tears, reminded him that loving her didn't mean disappearing with her, that his life had to continue even if hers did not. As weeks passed, Anita began recording video messages for the people she loved, each one a goodbye wrapped in wisdom, forgiveness, and hope, including one for a child whose true parentage she had protected for decades, a secret she planned to reveal only after she was gone. Believing that some truths were too explosive to survive her presence, her final birthday arrived quietly, marked by candlelight and 4 smiles, and as she made her wish, she didn't ask for more time. She asked for peace, a moment that broke everyone in the room when they realized she had already accepted what they still couldn't. And in the final weeks, Anita grew weaker but clearer, spending her days sitting by the window, watching life continue. Without her, teaching Vernon how to let go one breath at a time, until one early morning, as the sun rose and birds sang like nothing was wrong with the world, Anita slipped away holding Vernon's hand, her final words a whisper of gratitude for a life that, despite its pain, had been filled with love, and as the house filled with mourners and secrets began to unravel in her absence, one truth became undeniable. Anita's death was not the end of her story, but the beginning of consequences, revelations, and reckonings that would forever change beyond the gates. The days after Anita's death unfolded like a slow-burning storm across Fairmont Crest, because grief in this town never arrived quietly. It arrived demanding answers, reopening wounds, and dragging secrets into the open whether anyone was ready or not. And Vernon, hollow-eyed and visibly thinner, moved through the house like a ghost, unable to bring himself to change anything, leaving Anita's slippers by the bed, her robe on the chair, her coffee mug untouched in the sink, as if freezing time might somehow keep her spirit anchored there. But what Vernon didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that Anita had carefully set events into motion before she died, a final act of control not out of bitterness but necessity, because she understood this family better than anyone and knew that without guidance, they would tear themselves apart. The first shock came at the memorial service, when the attorney Anita had quietly hired months earlier stood up and announced that there would be a private reading of her will and personal letters, not immediately, but in phases, spaced out over weeks, a stipulation that caused whispers to ripple through the chapel, especially when Haley's face drained of color, because Anita's steady gaze had followed her for years and Haley had always feared what that woman might leave behind. Nicole was the first to receive a letter, delivered to her doorstep late one night, and as she read Anita's familiar handwriting, she collapsed onto the couch in sobs because the letter didn't accuse or condemn, it forgave, acknowledging Nicole's resentment, her jealousy, her mistakes, and reminding her that strength didn't come from being perfect but from choosing compassion even when it hurt, a message that shattered Nicole's defenses and pushed her toward decisions she had been avoiding for years. Sharon's letter arrived next, forcing her to confront the truth about how often she had relied on Anita as emotional armor while never fully listening to her, and the guilt of that realization sent Sharon spiraling, lashing out at everyone until she finally broke down in Vernon's arms, admitting she was terrified of becoming the woman who survived while Anita didn't. Meanwhile, Bill received no letter at all, a silence that spoke louder than any words and drove him to obsession, convinced that Anita had left something hidden, something damning, because Bill knew better than anyone how much she had known about his past, about the crimes he thought were buried, and when a flash drive mysteriously appeared in his mailbox weeks later, his fear turned into panic as he realized Anita's reach extended far beyond the grave. Vernon's letter was the last to be delivered, and when he finally opened it, his hands shook as Anita's words guided him through his grief, instructing him not just to mourn her but to live without her, to forgive himself for the moments he couldn't save her, to find joy again even if it felt like betrayal, and tucked inside the envelope was a final request, one that stunned him to his core, asking him to tell the truth about a child whose identity had been protected by lies for decades, a truth Anita believed would heal more than it destroyed, but only if Vernon was brave enough to speak it. As Anita's hidden plans continued to unfold, tensions escalated, alliances shifted, and the weight of her absence became a presence all its own, haunting every conversation, every confrontation, every tear shed behind closed doors, because Anita had not simply died. She had ignited a reckoning, and as the family braced for revelations that threatened to rewrite their history, one thing became terrifyingly clear. Anita's final 4 months were not just the end of her life. They were the beginning of consequences that would echo through beyond the gates for generations to come. As the weeks stretched on, Anita's presence seemed to grow stronger rather than fade, because every room in Fairmont Crest carried echoes of her choices. And Vernon soon realized that grief was only the surface of what she had left him to navigate, since the truth she asked him to reveal sat heavy in his chest like a second heart, beating louder every time he looked at the family gathered around him, unaware that the foundation of their identities was about to crack, and the longer he delayed, the more volatile everything became, especially as Haley grew increasingly erratic, snapping at servants, picking fights with Nicole, and hovering too closely whenever Anita's name was mentioned, because she sensed. No, she knew that something was coming for her. Bill, unraveling under the weight of his own paranoia, finally plugged in the flash drive and watched as Anita's calm, steady face filled the screen, her voice gentle but unyielding as she spoke directly to him, exposing not only his financial crimes and manipulations, but his moral cowardice, reminding him that power without accountability was rot, and warning him that if he didn't confess voluntarily, the evidence would be delivered to the authorities, a message that left Bill pale and shaking. Realizing too late that Anita had been the only thing standing between him and total ruin. Meanwhile, Vernon's silence fractured his relationships, pushing Sharon into suspicion and Nicole into quiet despair, because both women could feel that something enormous was being withheld, and when Vernon finally called a family meeting, the tension was unbearable, the air thick with fear and expectation as he stood where Anita used to stand, his voice breaking as he revealed the truth about the child Anita had protected, a revelation that detonated through the room, rewriting loyalties, severing bonds, and forcing each person to confront the lies they had unknowingly lived inside. Cries erupted, accusations flew, and Haley, cornered by the truth, finally dropped her mask, unleashing years of resentment and hatred in a confession that shocked even herself, admitting that she had manipulated, stolen, and destroyed because she believed Anita was the one obstacle she could never overcome, a woman whose moral clarity made Haley feel exposed and small. Vernon, devastated but resolute, realized in that moment that Anita's final gift was not peace but honesty, brutal and necessary, because only through destruction could something real be rebuilt, and as the family splintered in the aftermath, alliances reshaped and enemies emerged, Anita's influence lingered like a guiding force, reminding them that love was not about preserving comfort, but confronting truth, and as Fairmont Crest braced itself for legal battles, emotional fallout, and revelations yet to come, it became clear that Anita's death had not ended her story at all. It had transformed her into the quiet architect of everything that would follow, a woman whose final 4 months would continue to shape lives, shatter illusions, and redefine what it truly meant to live beyond the gates. In the aftermath of Vernon's revelation, Fairmont Crest descended into a fragile, volatile silence, the kind that hums beneath the skin and threatens to explode at the slightest provocation, because no one knew how to exist in a world where Anita's quiet strength was gone and her truths were now fully unleashed, and the shock of what had been revealed fractured the family into pieces that didn't quite fit back together. With Sharon retreating into icy composure as a defense mechanism, Nicole torn between rage and heartbreak as she questioned every memory she once trusted, and Vernon standing alone in the wreckage, realizing that keeping Anita's final promise had cost him nearly everything, yet still believing, with painful clarity, that she had been right. Haley, exposed and cornered, spiraled rapidly, her carefully curated image unraveling as whispers spread through the community, former allies distancing themselves while enemies sharpened their knives, and for the first time, Haley wasn't controlling the narrative, she was drowning in it, haunted by Anita's words echoing in her mind, reminding her that lies don't die quietly, they rot and poison everything they touch. Bill, desperate to save himself, attempted damage control, manipulating, bribing, and threatening anyone he believed might have access to Anita's evidence, but paranoia consumed him, because every knock at the door felt like law enforcement, every unknown number felt like exposure, and when he finally broke down and confessed to Randy in a moment of weakness, he sealed his own fate, unaware that Randy had already chosen a side. A choice inspired by Anita's unwavering belief that truth mattered even when it destroyed the powerful. Vernon, meanwhile, began to see Anita everywhere, not as a ghost, but as a compass, guiding him through moments of doubt, reminding him that grief was not weakness and that rebuilding required courage he wasn't sure he possessed. Yet when a mysterious final letter addressed simply to the family was announced by Anita's attorney, Vernon understood that her work was not finished. Because Anita had always believed that closure was not a moment, but a process, one that demanded patience, pain, and participation from everyone involved. When the letter was finally read aloud, its content struck like a thunderclap, revealing that Anita had quietly funded scholarships, medical care, and legal aid for people the family had wronged over the years, forcing them to confront the tangible consequences of their privilege. And in doing so, she reframed her death not as an ending but as restitution, an act that left even her harshest critics speechless. Tempers flared, lawsuits were threatened, and alliances were tested as the family argued over whether Anita's actions were noble or manipulative, but beneath the chaos was an undeniable truth. Anita had seen them clearly, loved them honestly, and refused to let them escape accountability. As nights grew longer and the gates of Fairmont Crest closed tighter against the outside world, each character faced a reckoning of their own, because grief had become a mirror, reflecting who they were when stripped of comfort and denial. And as the fallout from Anita's final 4 months continued to ripple outward, destroying reputations, forging unlikely bonds, and setting the stage for justice long overdue, it became painfully clear that Anita's legacy was not just love or loss, but transformation, and nothing, not power, not money, not fear, would ever be the same beyond the gates. As the weight of Anita's final actions continued to press down on everyone, Fairmont Crest became a battleground of conscience and consequence, where even the most powerful walls could not keep the truth from seeping in. And Vernon found himself thrust into a role he never wanted but could not escape, becoming the reluctant moral center of a family that no longer trusted itself, because without Anita, there was no buffer, no quiet voice smoothing over sharp edges, only raw emotion and unfinished business, and each day brought a new reminder of how deeply she had shaped them all. Nicole, unable to reconcile the woman she loved with the secrets now exposed, began digging into Anita's past, searching for answers not out of suspicion but desperation, and what she uncovered shook her to the core, because Anita had been fighting battles long before the cancer, silently intervening to stop scandals, pay off debts, and protect reputations, not to preserve power but to shield innocent people from collateral damage, a revelation that forced Nicole to confront how much of her own success had been built on sacrifices she never knew were being made on her behalf. Sharon, drowning in regret, finally admitted that she had taken Anita's presence for granted, confusing her steadiness for permanence, and in a raw, unguarded moment, she confessed that part of her anger wasn't about Anita dying. It was about surviving, about having to carry on without the one person who always knew what to say, and this admission cracked something open inside her, allowing grief to finally flow instead of calcify into bitterness. Haley's downfall accelerated as investigations closed in from multiple directions, each thread tracing back to Anita's meticulous records. And when Haley confronted Vernon in a desperate attempt to reclaim control, accusing Anita of cruelty and manipulation even in death, Vernon responded with a calm that stunned her, telling her that Anita hadn't destroyed her, she had simply stopped protecting her, a truth that left Haley reeling, because deep down she knew it was true. Bill's empire began to crumble piece by piece as evidence surfaced. Witnesses came forward, and allies abandoned him. And in a bitter twist of irony, the woman he had once underestimated had become the architect of his undoing, and as he awaited formal charges, Bill was forced to confront a terrifying reality, that Anita had seen his end long before he did and had chosen justice over loyalty. Through it all, Vernon began writing letters of his own, inspired by Anita's example, reaching out to those she had helped, hurt, and forgiven, and in doing so, he found a purpose beyond mourning. A way to honor her not by clinging to the past, but by carrying her values forward. As the gates of Fairmont Crest opened to the world Anita had tried to make right, the family stood on the edge of a future shaped by truth instead of illusion, knowing that the pain she left behind was not a curse but a challenge. And as the final echoes of her 4-month countdown faded into legacy, one truth stood unshakable. Anita's life had ended, but her influence had only just begun, and everything that followed would forever bear her mark beyond the gates.